Liberty Moderates, I'm very excited to welcome back to the show somebody I consider a dear friend of the show, someone who joined us in our infancy, in our youth, John Pavlovitz. Many of you know him, who've been with us since the beginning, and many of you know him who have not yet heard him on this program, who have since joined us in the 2.5 years we have been trying to save democracy and cleanse our politics, you might say. John Pavlovitz is a writer, pastor, and activist from Wake Forest, North Carolina. And he is a 25-year veteran in the trenches of the local church ministry. He's committed to justice and equality and diversity. And his work, while political, speaks to more meaning in our lives. Who we are, how we treat each other. Sounds just remotely spiritual or even vaguely theological, but it really isn't, because it connects the dots. His latest book is out. He's a widely published author, but his latest book, Worth Fighting For, is yet another testament to John's basic decency and goodness. And, he gives us a primer, not just how to behave in politics, not just how to behave in the combat that is right versus left, but how to behave as people. I'm excited for you to hear my conversation with John Pavlovitz. John Pavlovitz, it's so good to have you back.
You too, my friend. How are you today?
I'm great. In the years, so it has been 2.5 years since we've met. Obviously, a lot has changed. When we last saw you, you had a health scare that you overcame. So I congratulate you. You're in good health, good shape, I'm assuming.
I'm feeling well. Thank you. Yeah, it was a little bit of a detour there, but it was, really a great season altogether in just the things that I learned there, but feeling physically really well. So I really appreciate you asking. Yeah,
I just want to make sure, health being the most important thing, that you're well. We're so glad that you're here. And speaking of health, you're, as I mentioned in my introduction, your book, folks, which is out now, it's called Worth Fighting For. Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. It reads like a primer for how to just not be an asshole. Or let me put it a different way, how to be a good person. Your previous book, which is what we talked about last time you were here, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, I think tracks with this. But this time you're doing things like big concepts, resisting tribalism, learning how to love better, how to love toxic people at a distance, so on and so forth. But given that we're in this and I want to start with tribalism. We're in this really, really tribal place in our society. And, I know we follow each other. We share a lot of the same values. I think you might arguably be more liberal in the doctrinal sense than I am, but I think we both care about humanity and democracy. We know the threat of Trumpism. We lock arms on plenty. In your chapter on resisting tribalism, I wanted to read it because I think it speaks to an authenticity that a lot of people who are so-called fighting this fight are not living up to or maintaining, okay? This is from Resisting Tribalism, the chapter. It reads, our convictions and doctrines and moral codes only exist to the extent that we are willing and able to incarnate them. Jesus set the table. Jesus set the table, he does, because his heart compels him to. Once in a while, we act our way into belief, or we do something that leads us to a revelation or alters our worldview. More often, though, our moral center propels us into the world, orients us, directs our eyes, animates our beings. If you want to know what you really believe, play back this day in reverse in your head, and that will tell you. It certainly told the people you interacted with. In other words, if you're a person of faith, you can't have a bigger table with a tiny God. And before you speak, I want to say it made me think of Maya Angelou's great quote, and I'm paraphrasing. No matter how people think or engage, no matter what you do, people will always remember how you made them feel.
Right.
So let's open with that, because I think the depth of meaning here is very important about not just what we're fighting for politically, but what we're fighting for as humane beings with agency and hopefully with moral clarity.
Yeah, Adam, I think that's the heart of all of this. That I think in what tribalism does and what the state of our politics is that people are leading with what they claim to value. But then when we look at the legislation they might support or how they treat people, those things don't align. And so the writing is trying to help people get back to the idea that someone should be able to look at my life and experience me as a human being and retrofit what I believe. They should reverse engineer rather what I believe. They should be able to say, oh, that makes sense because he treats me this way or he responds this way.
Right.
And so it's trying to get people out of the sort of self-labeling and really do some introspective work on what is the yield of my life, or what are people experiencing when they rub shoulders with me, when they encounter me on social media. And as you know, it's a daily, almost hourly battle to make sure that my conduct is aligning with what I actually think I believe. And so that's kind of the heart of it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you know, the kind of work you've done in your life, which has been about meaning and about important activism and really trying to live up, I guess you could even say, spiritually or theologically, even to the Christ word, without corrupting it. Social media, as we know, and we have to spend so much time on it, really, especially Twitter, is like 10-15% of the country. All of this is to say that there's a vast middle in this country. And I was talking about this with Dawn, my great producer, before the show, who I find we are in a conundrum, okay? And I'm going a little bit narrower now to politics, okay? So we have an election where yet again we have a rematch that 70% of the country doesn't want. That is not a partisan poll. They just don't want it. But that's where we are, and we have to live with the choices that we have. It's okay to say that Biden is older, and Biden may not be as fit as a fiddle as he once was. I certainly don't think he's senile. Trump, nonetheless, remains a menace, to democracy and all the things we believe. But the thing I'm struggling with is if you look at these two people and you don't really like either of them and you opt to choose someone else, and I'm not even suggesting Bobby Kennedy, who I'm not a fan of. This speaks to values and politics together and the real world. People are frustrated. People are in the center. And we've grown a lot because of this. I'm not hawking for anybody. I'm saying, though, isn't it my right as a democratic citizen to feel as valued and not judged if I opt not to choose one of these people? What's your choice on that? I am not backing Trump at all. I voted for Joe Biden. There's a lot of things I don't like. There's a lot of things I do like. You don't have to agree with your president on everything. But if I say, hey, I want to write in, Nikki Haley because I really would have liked her, isn't that part of being a democracy? What's wrong with that? I mean, okay, so I just want to speak to you on that.
Sure. I think, Adam, when I started this journey as a pastor in a local church, and I was writing about family and faith and just issues around being a pastor, but not speaking directly into politics at all because I was on staff at a church. And it was only when Trump started his campaign and I began seeing what was happening in the evangelical world that I felt compelled to speak more explicitly into that. And so that ties into this because I think I decided then I needed to ask Christians to vote strategically rather than historically or emotionally, not just the way they had always voted, but to vote in a way to protect us from what I felt was a growing existential crisis in Trump. And so that's basically where I am. I share the longing that people have for something better than the two-party system. But I truly do believe that if Trump gets a second term, we'll essentially have a one-party system, and anything that we aspire to have or to work toward will be virtually impossible. And so it's really the timing of this particular election and what's at stake. I'm trying to have people think about playing the movie forward past November 5th and say, if Trump is in power, whose lives are going to be better, who's going to be safer, who's going to feel more seen and more protected. And with the human and civil rights rollbacks we've already seen, it simply feels irresponsible to make that one of the possibilities. And so the only way to remove that possibility is to vote Democrat at this place and time. As someone who's a registered independent and has been for my whole life, that's my heart, is to make sure that we can preserve the best parts about what America aspires to be.
Yeah. Well, which I think is a very good point. Look, I mean, I've staked part of my identity on Never Trump. I wanted to hear it explained in those terms, because I do think that people are wrestling, and you, as being, struggling, like the work you did in the world of faith. People struggle with their choices, and they're not all bad people. Speaking of that, Trump probably, at this point, I still think he's a good bet to lose. I mean, by no means is the fight over, but
Right.
There's a lot of things that I think make him a very unattractive candidate for a lot of reasons. Even for people that voted for him twice, if you can believe it. I can't believe anybody voted for him once, but there are people voted for him twice, even wondering if they should vote for him a third time. But there's a lot of people on the independent side who've had it, or they're ex-conservatives, or they're just independents, whatever. But Trump probably will get, by my estimates, 46% of the vote. That's kind of what he always got. Last time he got, 75 million. 46% of the country is not bad people. 46% of the country are not evil people. 46% of the country are not people who shouldn't have a shot at redemption, or shouldn't be viewed or valued in the same way. How do you deal with engaging people like that who, yes, I agree, you could be emboldening a true authoritarian and a menace, but understanding some of those people's, when I say concerns, I don't mean I hate immigrants. That's not acceptable. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the things they wrestle with. Maybe it's their day-to-day lives. Maybe it's the way they were raised. Maybe it is just taxes. I mean, how do you think what's the best way in your mind to engage? Because your book is a great primer, worth fighting for, because finding courage and compassion when cruelty is trending. Sometimes, right, the best way to mitigate cruelty is to be compassionate toward people who are also being cruel.
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember that Trump supporters are not a monolith in the way that Christians are not. So I used to, be part of a mega church, and I was on staff there, and people might be driving by and say, I know what all those people are about. But when I began talking about LGBTQ equality and racial justice, it turned out there was a schism in that church, because not everyone was fully on board with everything that was being taught. And I think we look at Trump supporters, it's really easy for us to throw them into a box, just like, it is for them to do to us. It's remembering that mass, that collective, is made up of individual human beings with very different stories, very different churches they grew up in, and life experiences. So I try to respect someone's road, even if I don't agree with their conclusions. And so interpersonally, that's a lot easier than collectively. It's much more challenging to look at a group of people and figure out, how do I reach them? But one-on-one, when I'm talking to another human being and I see their humanity and I remember it, then that's the best I can do. I don't want to dehumanize, because that is the heart of the worst of what we're seeing about religion and politics right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I was raised a secular Jew, but I consider myself certainly culturally Jewish. But the philosophy that impacted me the most was Buddhism. And one of the things I learned from Buddhism, right, is that, there's this, God, make peace, not war, love everybody, which, definitely can sound kumbaya or hokey. But what the best Buddhism teaches you as a philosophy is not to be unrealistic, but it says that if you can be nice to one person every day and you can change them or engage them, that's the path to peace, right? So if I meet somebody I disagree with, if I can try to have a good faith argument, and we have so many bad faith arguments, right? Worthy debates that we need to have, which end up dehumanizing or demoralizing other communities, are often from people who are just such bad faith people. I mean, listening to Charlie Kirk or Tucker Carlson lecture people on morality is obviously ridiculous. Right. But, for example, I don't think that the idea, and though I'm gay, and I'm certainly socially liberal, but I don't think the idea of like trans women in sports is a settled issue. Mm-hmm. I don't think the government should ban it. I don't think it's something that we shouldn't punch down about, but I think it's worth a national discussion that we don't always have. So your book speaks to this in what's called a relational Cold War, which I thought we should dive into. You write, we don't talk anymore. This time, it was a 55-year-old mother of three from Madison, Wisconsin, referring to her estranged mother. But it's not a unique story. I hear these confessions dozens of times a day in some form or another. In the work I do, leading people through the minefields of relational turbulence, that's the pervasive and enduring truth I've witnessed over and over these past several years, a great, what you call, pulling away. We are at the threshold of our collective tolerance for interpersonal conflict and nearing a point of no return. There's only so many times you can attempt to contest someone's fantastical conspiracy theory with facts they refuse to acknowledge. Only so many terse and extended text exchanges you can endure. Only so many family meals punctuated by profanity you can sit through. Only so many talking point tirades your reserves of compassion and patience can sustain. Eventually, the exhaustion takes over and the noise and bombast give way to distance and silence. The unfriending and ghosting and the disconnection slowly begin to fully separate us. So beautifully said. Everyone should have this by their bed, but it speaks to where I was going. You know, if somebody comes to me and says, you know what, Adam, I've always supported gay rights. Let's use an example. I'm just having trouble with the trans thing. If they come out in a good faith way, I think your book shows us the way. Do you agree? Rather than saying, well, no, and then the Republicans hate you. In other words, discuss the kind of elegance of the bridge you're trying to provide here, the compassion.
Yeah, I think the challenge, Adam, is that when we're having someone across from us, if we have some, that's where this is all falling to. We're talking about politics and religion as these sort of big systems, but ultimately it filters down into relational fracture. And so that's, as I've been traveling, that's what I'm seeing over and over again. And what I remind people, someone might come to me and they're much more progressive and they'll say, oh, I'm grieving the loss of my family because of what's happened since Trump arrived. But I have to remind them that the people that they're not speaking to are also grieving that loss. They're
Right.
just telling themselves a different story about why that loss exists. And so it's realizing that there's a tremendous amount of grief and people are wrestling with really complex issues. And these are things we care deeply about, whether it's immigration or healthcare or the environment or gun violence. We're passionate because we should be. This stuff really matters. And so it's, can we all kind of gather in a place and have our most sober and most empathetic, curious selves? And I think you hit on something correct when it's we can't assign motive to people. We have to, and if they show us that they're still willing to listen to us and they're still trying to have that communication, then we should keep trying. I think, the Charlie Kirks of the world and those voices don't speak for everyone, but they do change the temperature of the conversation because everyone's so quick to, kind of pull that trigger. And so that's what we need. We need to be kind of relentless in pursuing that connection with people. That's the only thing that's going to do it.
No, I think that's right. John, though we've had you, it's been a while. I also want to go back because I think your principles and your work obviously are defined by your formative years and your life and all you've been through. Let's go back to the beginning, your beginnings in Wake Forest. Tell everybody about your life, your early life, and how you came to, you through Catholicism and the church and all those different things that some people may know. A lot of new people here, excited to hear from you. So let's go back and say, who is John Pavlovitz? Talk about your road here.
Well, I was raised in central New York, Catholic, Roman Catholic, Italian family, and my faith was a big part of my life. But that faith was, as for many people, that was a story of a God who loved me, but I also needed to be concerned about really ticking off that God. Right. And as with many people, I began to drift away from that original faith story because I wasn't seeing the teachings of Jesus lived out as I hoped they would be. And so drifted for a bit, was what I would call a hopeful agnostic, and ended up going to college in Philadelphia and living in the heart of Center City, Philly. And that changed everything for me because it expanded my view of the world. It got me out of the bubble. I began being immersed in diversity, and I saw poverty. And Adam, I experienced these things not as intellectual exercises or political debates or theological discussions, but they were in the form of people's lives and better stories that I got. Those stories started to change me. And 10 years later, when I suddenly was pulled into the church through just volunteering, it was nothing that I had planned at all. I began working with teenagers, found I had a heart for adolescents, for trying to kind of steward them through this really turbulent time of life, and found myself leaving my full-time career as an art director to minister full-time. And it's then that I kind of began this journey of, larger churches, higher profile. And as that happened, two things happened. I grew in my love for the work I was doing, but I realized that I was different, that there were fundamental tensions between what I was feeling the teachings of Jesus were leading me to do as a pastor and the pastor I was expected to be. And so in my case, it was, how much can I nudge those congregations? How much can I push a little bit? And finally got to the point where I felt I needed to speak explicitly in matters of sexuality and gender equality and racial justice. And that created tensions. And to the point where when I went to a new church and I didn't have the equity of trust and the relational capital, I say I heard God calling me to leave that church, and it came in the form of my pastor's voice saying, "You're fired." And ever since then, that happened about 10 years ago, I found myself with this national audience because I was finally able to speak clearly, explicitly, and I wasn't beholden to any system, any religious tradition, any political party. And that's the heart of it for me, is that once you can be an authentic human being and break out of those things, you can connect with people on a human level. And that's kind of led me to sitting here with you.
But you have a base in Wake Forest, do you not? Because that was my memory. There was some relationship to Wake Forest.
Well, we actually moved to this area 10 years ago to take a job at the church where I was fired from. And so it became trying to figure out, well, are we going to go, find a job at another church? Am I going to move back, to our roots in the Northeast and start a business there, an organization of some sort, or a church? And really, we just decided, let's just stay and I'll keep doing what I've always done, which is speak as clearly as I can into matters that are important to me and keep caring for people. And that's when the blog actually found a national audience. I was on staff at a church here, a progressive community. And so I have a base here of, friends and people from that church. But really virtually is where everything began to happen. But we just decided we're staying where we are.
Would you define yourself as a Unitarian? Is that a fair?
It's not. I mean, that's on my Wikipedia because that's how Wikipedia works. I speak at a Unitarian.
I asked you that last time, and I specifically didn't listen to the episode because I don't remember your answer.
No, yeah, that's because I speak all over the country, but there's a Unitarian community where they asked me to come quite often, and so it became, some story was run that said I was Unitarian pastor. I think there are a lot of things about the Unitarian philosophy that that resonate with me. Things about the personal spiritual experience that you're having is completely unique, but it's okay to have that in a collective group of people who respect that road. So in a Unitarian community, you'll find Buddhists and Catholics and agnostics and atheists. And so that part about it, I love. And with any system, there are things that aren't compatible for me. So, but as someone who just tries to live a spiritual life outside of dogma and doctrine, that often is a place that I'm comfortable in. So that's kind of where I am. I'm a spiritual mutt. I always have been. And, doing this work, I've become sort of people say, oh, he's a voice of the progressive Christianity or the Christian left. And I'm really not. I'm just the voice of one human being who's trying to, figure some of this out and sharing my journey. And where that work resonates with people, they join me. Yeah.
And actually you prompted my next question. Again, if people are not monoliths, and neither are people who are in groups. So the Christian right, the Christian left. But one of the things is to find, I think, our politics for the worse. You and I talked about this, and I know you talk about a lot, is, from the late 70s on, the politicalization of, very right-wing doctrinal Christianity as a means of public policy. As somebody who's an independent too, who is very much in agreement with Republicans, let's say, on economics and defense policy, I just can't abide the viciousness of a movement which deprives women the right to choose. Obviously, the fight that's been the fight that has endured against anything LGBT. Certainly now it's more trans than gay. In the earlier era, the wanting to put school prayer in the Constitution. What really were the school choice was essentially initially a way to segregate Southern white kids from black kids back in the day. I think that the public school system has its problems and charter schools have a different thing. But all of that is to say, those have been the loudest voices, from Jerry Falwell to Ralph Reed to Pat Robertson, and they came to dominate Republican politics for so long. They're weirdly muddled in the MAGA era. We'll get back to that in a second, because I had a great conversation with David French, a wonderful guy from the New York Times just recently on this. I don't want to use the word Protestant left because you aren't independent and you don't speak for everybody, but why has there been, up until now, I mean, again, Trump mobilized so many of us to just wake the hell up and say, we got to save the country, we have to stop this. But all the years leading up to it, where were, I again, have been doing politics since I'm 14. That's the kind of geek I am. And so it's not like I woke up and said, I have a podcast, I love politics.
Right.
Thought about it, read about it, fascinated by religion as a non-religious person. Where have the more progressive or left or mainline Protestant voices been, or Catholic, on a lot of these policy issues? How come I haven't heard as much of them? And I think my point is, I think people want to group you in a positive way to a movement that seems to have been not muted, but certainly subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what happened is, a couple of things. Someone asked me maybe 5 years ago, she said, where are the progressive Franklin Grahams? And I said, you're never going to see them because we don't want them, because a progressive movement doesn't want, centralized authority dictating everything. And so we are, by that nature, we are more segmented and spread out. And so there aren't going to be a lot of these sort of large scale movements. And that makes it difficult for people of faith who aren't completely right wing to have a visible presence. There's no way for them to have collective influence. And so that's the difficult part, and why I love the work that I do, because people can at least gather around that writing as a hub. And so, and when your faith perspective is gentler, I remember a conservative pastor who became more progressive, and he said, I really miss hell. He said, because when I had hell, I could get people in my churches to do anything, to give, to participate, to volunteer, to vote. And he said, once I lost that sort of damnation angle and the fear, then my people, I couldn't get them to motivated. So he was seeing that as sort of a difficult thing. I think that speaks to what we're talking about, because a more conservative theology can keep ratcheting up the urgency and the guilt. And it also runs on needing an adversary, an encroaching enemy. And that's what the right has so perfectly, leveraged. And so I think progressive faith, it's about figuring out what is our urgency. And for me, it's humanity, it's human and civil rights, it's democracy.
Right. I mean, it speaks to a little bit of, and I'm trying to give people snippets of it because it's so good from the book, your What's at Stake chapter, where you write, we find ourselves being called to be allies and advocates and activists for the common good in a world where it may be more difficult, the opposition more galvanized, and the need far greater. And you said that in the context of LGBT rights and human rights and the overturning of Roe v. Wade. When David French was on my program, and I keep bringing him up because he noted a fascinating distinction in his own journey as a Christian, that there were so many people in MAGA, who backed Donald Trump, who have never read the Bible. I mean, just haven't read it. So, church meant community in Opelika, Alabama, or pick a southern town, anywhere, specifically in the South where you would go because that's what you did. And you didn't read it. You listened to what the community said. You voted how everybody else voted. You lived kind of in a fear-based existence. Not everybody, but the idea that, right, oh my God, the world is changing and they're taking away our Christianity and we can't have that happening. And then, of course, then there are people that have read the Bible, and only now there have been more there's a right-wing pastor, I believe, right, we came out the other day on Twitter and said, I've had enough of Trump, it's enough. He seems to be losing some of that currency. But what's been in your travels, because again, you do healing work, really. You're not there to say, oh, you say you're a Christian, you voted for Trump, go after yourself. Okay. People who say, I'm a Christian, and therefore I need to support Donald Trump. What's been like I want to give them a kind of salutary analysis. How do they arrive at that place? I mean, is it just the judges? Is it the court? What is it?
I think, well, fear is a huge part of it. The vilifying of other people, or the sense of being perpetually in danger. I always say no one is at their best when they're terrified. And so that explains some of it. And I think what I began to notice was that conservative Christian pastors, evangelicals, they never mentioned really Jesus or the teachings of Jesus. It was always the idea of God in a very general sense, and the Bible, because they could sort of superimpose their values onto the idea of God, or they could take the Bible and find one or two verses that helped in their cause. And then you find a group of people who really have a desire for a shorthand faith, which you kind of alluded to. They just want to come to church and have the experience and have someone up on that platform tell them what to believe. And they don't want to do that kind of work that it takes to investigate what did the teachings of Jesus actually say in comparison to how is Donald Trump living. And so once you do that, there is a confrontational aspect to that, and people are going to be in a defense posture. And I always say no one has time for an existential crisis, but these Christians probably should take time to have one and really ask if their values that they think they have align with this, this person and his movement. And so really a lot of the work that I do that really ticks people off isn't saying anything. It's just simply using the words that I grew up on, that I know they, aspire to, and say, tell me where you see these things in this movement. So, that's a little bit of that where that comes from, I think.
What's your view on, and I've been thinking about this a lot, growing up going to having a civic organization, or specifically a house of worship, could be a synagogue or a church. We did not go to synagogue regularly. We were high holy holiday Jews at best. But, I went to a very well-known Presbyterian prep school, a very good one. And most of my friends growing up, they'd go every Sunday to the Miami Shores Presbyterian Church is what they did. It was part of the community, as it has been for so many Americans. And there's been some theories put out there, which I think have some merit I want to talk to you about, which is the collapse of community as it relates to organized religion. Not the fire and brimstone, just that you refresh yourself on Sunday, you clean your palate, your spiritual palate, you go see your people, you go to a lunch afterward, you do that thing, you heal, you have a family moment, community, neighborhood moment. The collapse of that, that void has been filled obviously by the internet, by social media, by the me of it all, by the let me be loud and nasty and show you how big and awful my brand is or how famous I am. Do you think there's a connection, between a loss of, let's just maybe call it a kind of civic spirituality? Do you think that's led to, and again, and I know you do this work, I'm not suggesting everybody start going to church on Sunday, but there is something nice about going somewhere and having that experience and what it means for community. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you started to see over the past few decades is the practice of going to church is something we've seen fewer and fewer Americans have that as their sort of default story. And most people, where I grew up, everyone went to church or some sort of place of worship. And then you don't see that. So that disconnection, that pulling apart was already starting to happen. And you have social media where you have the illusion of community, but you don't always have it. And then, the pandemic, I think the pandemic brought sort of forced geographic isolation in addition to this sort of emotional disconnection. And so there's been a loneliness that I see happening as I talk to people throughout this country. And that loneliness is a group of people who are starved for community. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at something like the MAGA movement, and you say, well, people ask, how can someone I know and love embrace that? Well, it's because they have found some sense of being seen or some sense of identity in that movement, something bigger than themselves. So I think the loss of church as just a hub for humanity has not been replaced. And so that's where we are. We have detribed in a lot of ways and not retribed. And so there's a gap there.
Yeah, and I think the absence of inclusive messaging from, let's call it Christian politics to keep it general, has been hard, right? For generations of people who've grown up, certainly the last two generations, grown up more tolerant, right? More open. It's a different country than I'm almost 50 now, in the 70s, a different world. And, people don't want to hear the hate and all that. I mean, there's even in polls of younger evangelicals, a greater and growing acceptance of LGBT people, even when they're members of churches that don't adhere to that. That's interesting. You wonder if, even though there's less people going to church, does the generational divide maybe change the trajectory of faith for people?
I think so. Doing the work I do, I don't have a church, but I have this odd congregation of people who are from all over the place, and they just come in the spirit of the things we've been talking about, wanting to lead with compassion and wanting to do what's best for the common good, and realizing that whether it's political or theological, that those systems can often be the thing that is the barrier. And so it's trying to figure out what is the new way that we relate to one another, and that we pool our collective influence. I think that's the other thing. People want to feel meaning. They want to have something, bigger than their own story to take part in, and they're finding difficulty now. Where do I belong?
Yeah. With your new book, which I think is different, obviously, from If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. It's like, like I said, you're giving everyone a little primer. This could be by your bedside. It could be read every day. Little small essays and think pieces and little nuggets of wisdom. What made you write the book like this? I mean, because you do tackle politics, but it does seem larger than politics, which I think is very important in an era where everything is toxically political. Oh my God, everything's politics. I can't be friends with somebody who voted for Trump, or how can I not have an view on that? Where are the Democrats on that? Rather than saying, how does this have meaning for me? How does this help me connect to other people? How does this make me understand myself? Talk about the book, and because that's what I loved about it. I mean, I love your writing anyway, but this was just a delight. I couldn't put it down, which was great.
Well, thank you, Adam. Traveling as much as I have over the past decade, I've said that I don't see myself as a pastor or an author anymore, but a collector of stories or a war correspondent. And when I leave all these different exchanges with people all throughout the country, whether in person or online, it's just the sense of intense fatigue that people are feeling. And so the book was really designed to just be a resource for people who are really tired and wanting to do the right thing and feeling like I have to check out or I have to retire from being an engaged activist. And so that's really, it's meant to be just sort of what I say is a hug around the neck or a kick in the behind, whatever you need at the moment. And it's about remembering, there are two wounds at the center of the book, the wounds of the world and the wounds we sustain attending to them. And I think compassionate people are much better at the former than the latter. We can easily see the brokenness and the injustice, but can we see the toll that it's taken on us? And I think if more of us really tended to those things, we would be better able to engage people who disagree with us. We'd be better equipped for the long haul. And so that's really what the book is designed to do.
Yeah. Back to the sort of schism in politics, the right-left Christian schism. What is how do you view the current movement of Christian nationalism? I mean, again, I don't, used to be, they were so visible, not that they're not around, but they used to see Ralph Reed and Robertson and follow all these guys that always look like the big bad wolf. Like, obviously they're there. Obviously they prefer Trump, although he's losing some support. What is the current face of it? What do you think their goals are? Are they really are they really aiming, like some people argue, for a theocratic nation and a second Trump term?
Yeah, I think, Adam, looking at, Project 2025, looking at the Heritage Foundation and all those folks, I mean, they would like their theology to be the law of the land. And I think my hope or, my suspicion is that there are people who are now religious and they're seeing that this alignment with Trump is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. And so I think there is a lot of flux, in happening right now in those movements, because it's who speaks for us or who we aligned with. Mm-hmm. I think there is always going to be a version of Christianity that wants to rule and wants their faith to be expressed in the power that they influence over other people, while many people are saying that's really wasn't the movement of Jesus. Jesus was about inviting people and about a choice, and that's what ultimately spirituality of any kind is. And they know that they don't want their faith legislated. So I think the Christian nationalists are really coming up against society evolving past some of that, and yet they have this sort of last gasp as a dying dinosaur, and they've had that with Trump. They've had that sort of power, and so it's really, we're at this point where who's going to win? Is this thing going to die out, or at least be irrelevant enough that it won't have power, or is it going to be able to get itself into a place after November that they can't not be moved? So that's a really strange spot that our nation is in.
Yeah, no, I know. And your book, you write, and this is obviously an issue that's a great passion for me and meaning for me, and I've seen it in your Substack. The horrors of October 7th and what happened to Israel, the bloody massacre of what would amount to be almost 40,000 Americans, because there's 9 million Israelis in total, and obviously the response. And I'm a Zionist, and I can dislike Bibi Netanyahu, but still see Israel must defend itself. Your book does a great job. But I really want to push you on this other issue about, the sort of Christian anti-Semitism, the old right-wing anti-Semitism, stuff like that. Christians justifying anti-Semitism, forgetting the traditions of Jesus, a rabbi born in Judea, the carpenter from Nazareth, all this stuff. The thing that you're seeing right now that I think is absolutely horrific, and I think just because it isn't manifested by right-wing people this time, is the far left progressive response to what's going on, to this radicalization on campus, which, by the way, is deeply illiberal. It has nothing to do with religion, but it absolutely, I think, overlooks the horrors and atrocities of Hamas and what Israel lives with and against. Obviously, war is hell, and it always has been. There's 9 million dead Germans. There were 4 million dead Japanese. We nuked 100,000 of them in 2 cities. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying that's what we've done. Killed hundreds of thousands of people in Afghanistan. But it does, this particular movement, okay, even though it's under the guise of, we're angry at Israel, or we're anti-Israel or anti-Zionist, but globalize the Intifada, Hamas are our people, burn Tel Aviv to the ground. That is not a peace movement. Right. And this is not a right-wing movement. And I just feel, as an independent, because I don't hawk for either party, but I'm also a Jew, I just can't understand why every single Democrat isn't fervently condemning this. I'm not saying every Republican's an angel, but there are a lot of Christians in the Republican Party, and I know we can talk about evangelical Christianity's relationship to Israel, but quite frankly, I don't share their views on Revelation, so I don't care. Israel needs its support. And I'm seeing this sickness on the left. And I know you're an independent. I know you're anti-MAGA, as am I. None of this is to say that there isn't a real threat of democracy from the right. But how do you address this? Besides, kids shouldn't be killed in Gaza. Of course they shouldn't. But what do you do? With this spread of toxicity.
Yeah. I talk to folks every day, online, but really offline, in so many conversations, and rabbis and imams, and everyone's trying to figure out, how can I speak into this moment in a way that I can be heard beyond the sort of immediate response that I get to the questions or the complexities of it. And I think that's where we are right now. It's still so fraught with lack of information. I think so many of us, it's such a foreign thing to us that we want something quick that makes us feel righteous. We want to do something tangible so that we can sort of get this unthinkable, death off of our shoulders. And that's, I think you see a laziness that just falls into, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the immediate response. So there's just not a lot of time for people to sit and grieve all of this, right? And so I think that's just where politics, the limitations of the collective are showing up again on the left, as well as it happens on the right. Yeah. And I'm in a place where I genuinely want to come in a spirit of understanding so that I can translate for the other. And there's often you're vilified for even trying to make that because you're, characterized as making a concession to one group or another. And I think most people are this is unfathomable stuff. And so it's hard to figure out what is my response as a decent human being supposed to be? Mm-hmm. Politicians are one thing and they have a different motivation, or the media members, they can manipulate. And we know why they do those things, but average people, they're just kind of swept up in it.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially in Worth Fighting For, but in the arc of your work, you speak of the collective and you speak of humanity and you speak about getting back down to understanding people and understanding, not in a cliched sense, but what humanity is. Okay. Yeah. And that's what defines us. And I bring this up for a specific reason. One of the things, and I've written about it extensively on my Substack, is that even with the well-earned or laudable aims of progressivism, okay, of which I have policy disagreements respectfully, but certainly there's some wonderful values that animate what it means to be progressive. Mm-hmm. The oppression hierarchy that's come out of universities, come out of binary thinking along racial lines, the white oppressor versus non-white oppressor, very simple reductive stuff, has been fed to a generation of people, and then they've shared that on social media and so on and so forth, where identity trumps everything. That, one of my closest parents' friends growing up was a Mizrahi Jew from Iraq. I mean, if you looked at this man, he is not white. Never thought about it until this nouveau way of thinking said he is white, which of course he isn't. Half of Israel isn't white. But my larger point is that if we're working toward humanity, right, and we're challenging these shibboleths of MAGA, these fear-based, divisive, fundamentally anti-democratic ideas, don't you think it's worth moving people off of? It doesn't mean, right, that you can't be proud as a gay man, or it doesn't mean that your life doesn't matter if you're Black. It also matters if you're Jewish. But don't you think that all of those things become secondary to trying to reclaim our collective humanity, that our personal views and our values are shaped by so much more than just our grouping?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, people are intellectually lazy in general. And so they don't want to kind of dig into things, complex issues, and really look for, well, what are the flaws in even my perspective? And that's not something we normally do. And with the speed and activity of life, everyone just wants a quick sense of, oh, here's what I believe, and here's how it's going to go. And I think you see that the lack of critical thinking happens regardless of whether you're progressive or conservative. And so it's, can I continue to be critical of my own position? Can I have the self-awareness to examine myself personally, and then whatever groups I'm associated with? I shouldn't be beholden to those groups. I don't owe anyone, absolute agreement. In fact, that the essence of who we are should be that we're fighting for the common good. And if my political party or my religious tradition is fighting that, I should be confrontational toward it. And it's not a sign that I don't care deeply about those traditions. It means I respect them enough to want to challenge them. And I don't think we have enough of that, of people saying, I'm going to push back against whatever my party line is, because I feel like it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think, your spiritual work is so deeply woven into you. And I think, again, so many people are lacking so much meaning. But I think I love that the end of your book kind of reclaims patriotism too. That you really do say, yes, we've done our stuff. Not everything we've done is right, but America's a great country. And, like you write, it may be inconvenient, uncomfortable, and painful, but that is the price of liberty, right? A price each generation pays forward to the next, and how do you move off of what you call indecision, selfishness, apathy, complacency feeds into that, right? That, like you say, you don't know what grieves you most right now, but you do. I don't know, meaning you, John, don't know what grieves each individual person, but you can do something, and you can take the blueprint of this country, the longest and largest and most enduring self-governing experience in history, still a very young country, and continue to improve it. And I think the idea of patriotism mixed with patriotism as a means of healing sadness, of working toward ameliorating and mitigating that grief is a beautiful sentiment. And I wanted to kind of conclude with that because I think it concludes the book beautifully. And what you call the future we want.
Well, Adam, I think that's the other thing that this sort of continual culture war tribal thing happens is what it said is there's a group of people who we love America, you don't. And the idea is, no, someone like myself who leans more left, I love what this nation aspires to be. And I know all its flaws and all its imperfections, but I know what it could be. I think that's the desire for most of us, most people getting up every day. If they're not at the extreme ends, like you said, this humane middle, they want that. And I try to let people know, even if they're politically opposite me, I'm for them. I want healthcare for their families as much as my own. I want safer, streets for their kids as for my own, and all those things. And so we should be interdependent. We should realize that we're tethered together. And if the book helps people remember that, then that will be a great thing.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I love having you on, John, because, my favorite president's Abe Lincoln, and I can't help but always quote him. And Lincoln was infused, as you probably well know, with a he was raised a Baptist, but he moved away from that toward a deeper sense of kind of Christian understanding of spirituality, which animated so much of how he governed. But of course, in that first inaugural, when he says the better angels of our nature, you're the embodiment of that, and if we can aspire to that, we're better people. I believe you're a leader in that. And that's something to always remember, I know that animates you, but it's like, that's what Lincoln said. We can be frustrated right now in this country. We can agonize. We can know that, for example, somebody like me doesn't love the direction Biden has taken in certain places, and we have policy differences, but that's not the larger question. The larger question is, who are we?
Yeah.
What do we stand for? And what kind of country do we want to have? And let's not let those, those things that appeal to our devils trump our better angels.
Yeah, that's it, man. Because, this country hopefully will outlive the two, current candidates for president. It's going to outlive us.
I think that's a guarantee. These two guys, I'm not wishing anybody death, but yes.
And, someone's going to inherit what we leave them. And we've inherited something from those who came from us. So it's about this place in time in history, and let's do something responsible with it so that there's something worth inheriting down the line.
Yeah, indeed. John Pavlovitz, his latest book is Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. John, before we go, where can everybody find you on the socials? Because I know you are ubiquitous.
Yeah, well, if you can spell my last name, Pavlovitz, there's not a lot of John Pavlovitzes out there. So you'll probably find me on, Facebook, X, Instagram, Substack, on my website. And just look forward to connecting with your readers and viewers.
As always, John, you're nothing if not among our better angels. And I thank you for being a friend of the show and for your work. Of course.
Thank you, Adam. Really glad
as
to
always.
be with you.
Great to have you. Always come back. You're always welcome. Dirty Moderates, in the meantime, stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe.